Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Barry Wormald, as you'll see from the introduction and the slides. I'm an MEP consultant who's been in the industry for 46 years now. So obviously started when I was very young, as you can tell. The subject we're going to talk about is basically ventilation of kitchens and different ways of doing it and what the issues are. And when I was asked to moderate on this, I thought, why should we talk about ventilation of kitchens? Is it an interesting subject? And when you think about a hotel and what it envisages, hotels use lots of energy. Energy costs are rising rapidly. The kitchen, if it's ventilated properly, will use between 20 and 30% of the cooling load of the hotel. So it's a very significant energy issue. Next thing is comfort. One of the most uncomfortable places to work in a hotel, for anybody who's been in hotels and been back of house, is the kitchen, because it can get very hot, very humid. It's a very pressurized role. If you watch the kitchen cooking programs that are on TV nowadays, you see things that perhaps we didn't see 5-10 years ago. So people are working in an intense atmosphere. And it's also an area where most fires start in a hotel, because there is flames, there's oil, and there are people rushing about. So the issues in kitchens are very serious and issues that need a lot of consideration. If energy costs are going to be maintained at a minimum level, it has to be comfortable for the people, and it has to be safe. So we have a range of experience on the panel in different areas, and I'll start off by asking the architect, Imran, what he thinks are the key issues from planning out the kitchen areas and location so that the ventilation can be simplified as much as possible. Over to you, Imran.
Is that working? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. Our current experience in India has been largely limited to large central kitchens and food facilities for IT companies, food courts and retail malls, and of course some of the hotels. While what has been our experience is the hotels are largely much better designed and taken care of in terms of the ventilation. Most of the IT facilities are not sort of designed to take care of these really large kitchens which are going to feed a large number of people at the same time with multiple cuisine, open kitchens, a lot of cooking taking place. The very interesting problem that we face is that usually it's on the ground level, and somehow we've had the experience, which I was telling Barry also, that as the food preparation starts, people start leaving their seats. They're all getting the smell of the food coming into, it's mixing up with the ventilation above. And so that has been one of the more peculiar problem where, of course, it's a good problem because it's really not the bad smell we are getting, but the other thing. The other problem that we find, especially as food courts, is that you get multiple tenants and they have differential requirements for their ventilation. And so it's a little different from the hotel situation where you know exactly what you want and what you need. But here it is almost like designing in the blind and then taking care of it. Other typical problems that we faced is, of course, the undersizing of kitchen, because most operators would like to squeeze it as much to increase the cover areas that we are finding. And the biggest challenge, of course, is heights, the volume within which to take the ducting through.
Okay. And all of these can be addressed if the right people are on board at the right time.
Correct. So
because the issues are understanding the locations, the equipment,
correct,
and the amount of ventilation.
Correct. So, like I'm saying, in the hospitality industry, we do not find that level of a lack of understanding. There's a lot of coherent experience that exists, and they're able to provide for it early going in. but it's actually the other spaces, and these are much larger eating areas, like a food court would cater to say 1,000 people at one time, 1,500 people at one time. So there is the heat load of the people that you have to take care of, and the kitchen ventilation, smells, everything that is kind of working together.
Yep.
And in that particular area, there's very little expertise, especially in India. I was pointing out to you earlier that especially in retail malls, in Southeast Asia, for instance, you have multi-level structures, and the food court is tucked away in somewhere in the basement, fourth basement, fifth basement. And there's not a smell that percolates at the upper floors. And I often wonder what is going into that too. Perhaps you can enlighten us on that.
Yeah. Well, before I do that, I'll pass on to Narendra Verma, who's been involved in the industry as long as me, I think, if not maybe a little bit longer, Narendra. And you come along next in the food chain, and you start to look at the layouts, the equipment that's needed for the type of cooking. Perhaps you can enlighten us on the problems you face from day one.
I think barriers. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So, as you just pointed out, I mean, most of the problems can be sorted out early if all the consultants are brought in early enough into the project so that the right amount of exhaust and ventilation can be calculated right from the beginning, so that we can, or the architects can leave enough ducts and shaft openings to take the exhaust out. Because quite a lot of times the architect works without this information and creates the exhaust and ventilation ducts, and later on the consultant comes in or the operator comes in and decides the number of restaurants and where the kitchen should be. And then you start working backwards, and you find that firstly the ducts or shafts left were not adequate, and secondly that they are not close to the shaft. The kitchens are far, so they require a lot of ducting from the kitchen to the vertical shafts. And that again creates a problem, because the idea behind the duct going vertically up is to create a grease filtration system somewhere before it goes for discharge into the atmosphere. And the longer you have the ducts, the more grease will settle within the ducts. So I think important thing is to get the consultants involved in the project at a very early stage and start getting the information to design the building.
Yeah. There are a number of ways that we know that you can reduce the amount of exhaust by looking at different types of hood, different configurations, UV filters, etc., which cost a little bit more money in the initial outlay, but they save you a lot in running costs, space, and even we find working for the large hotel chains that specify that in their design guides. A lot of owners, operators will take it out because of cost. Initial cost is high, so typically the owner of the hotel will say, no, I'm not going to put that in because it will cost me 2 lakh more, 3 lakh more, without looking at the overall picture. How do you think that we can present that in a better way as an industry to the owners, the operators, so that they can take the advice and get not just a more cost-effective system, but more comfortable conditions in the kitchen and less running costs?
You're absolutely right. I mean, those are the things that are required to reduce the cost as well as the size of the ducts, and exhaust and ventilation reduces the power consumption and everything else. But as we know, the cost of those systems are also very high. And the owners, firstly, when putting together the budgets, haven't considered for these things. And thereafter, they don't want to incur that kind of an expense. So resort to cost cutting. So unfortunately, that's where again I come in and say that this needs to be worked at the very initial stages when we are putting together even the budget to give to the client through the architect, that this will be the exhaust and ventilation requirements, and this will be the cost of the exhaust hoods with these filters, and so that the costs are given to the client right up front, and they could be then put in the budget. But later on, if we come along and then ask for these filters or systems to be put in, then we have a resistance from the client always. So that's again an uphill task and battle.
I found from experience over the years that if you have a team that works together and has the backup information, particularly case studies, that you've done it before, it's been proven, and hear the benefits, the client's more likely to listen. And one thing I think that we can all get from this forum is an interchange of ideas and experience, so that if we have tried some of these areas out and they have worked, that we can put that information together and use it to benefit the industry, which doesn't happen.
We've started doing that.
Yeah.
We're working with this information from day one, and we keep it a bit hush-hush and not talk about it in terms of what is cheaper, what is more expensive, and how it could be done in other ways. So we just take it through the project execution stage, and it will go through. Unless there is a serious problem in the budget, then we have problems.
Okay. Ashok.
Yeah.
We don't know each other and haven't worked together. What's your experience in this area, and what would you like to add to what's been said?
As Mr. Narendra Bedi said, hello. As Mr. Narendra Verma said, we should involve the consultants from the beginning and give and provide them their requirements through the architect. What actually happens that most of the time when you get a building which is already built and there is a height restriction is there, the area restriction is there, then we find it difficult to provide the appropriate ventilation systems, and some compromise have to take place. But otherwise, I will always recommend that the consultant should be taken from the beginning, as we take the architect, interior designer, and the MEP consultant. The facility planner also should be taken from the beginning, and due importance should be given to the kitchen designing as a whole.
Okay.
Otherwise, normally what happens that we concentrate only into the front of the house, public areas and so on, and the back of the house and the kitchen and laundry get the second priority, which should be avoided.
Yeah, but one of the biggest issues is that in a traditional design process, each of us has our own issues to address. We address with the client, and it's not addressed generally as a team. On a number of projects, the clients don't hold regular meetings with the entire team. They don't have all the relevant people on board at the right time. So how, let's say as an industry, can we lobby clients and try and get them to get all the relevant consultants on board at the same time, so they can be made aware of all the implications and the benefits of looking at different systems? Any thoughts and ideas?
I didn't get your...
Yeah. On a typical Indian project, we find that a lot of clients will not engage the whole design team at the beginning of the project. Then when they have meetings, they'll have individual meetings with each member of the design team. So the whole team is not together to push the benefits of an integrated approach to the design, so that everybody can comment on the benefits of a more efficient filtration system with smaller ducts, less running costs, etc.
Yeah, what you said is right. When in the beginning the total team is not taken on board, and when you're designing at the later stage, you have to even then you have to involve all the consultants and see what best you can do.
Okay.
I think, Barry, now we're seeing a larger spectrum of investors into the hotel industry. Earlier, we just had the hotel operators, traditional hotel operators, let us say, who used to invest in hotels and manage and run them themselves. They are and have been concerned about these things like energy conservation, cleaning of the ducts, having a good filtration system so that later on maintenance problems are reduced. But there is the new investor which has come in, who is now really very keen and interested only in the budget, and the cost by reducing it is the best way that he can maximize his profits. And he gives it to the operator, and he's not concerned with the problems of operation, maintenance, spares, availability of spares, and so on and so forth. So it's the second type of investor that is more resistant to going with better quality equipment, better energy savings and cost savings, and better cost savings, of course, he'll go in for, but better efficient, exhaustive ventilation. And nobody, in fact, has ever gone into details of explained the entire thing to him, that how much actually he could save in terms of the square footage that he could reduce in his cutouts that he leaves on the floors, or the lengths of ducts, etc., that he provides, or the grease, filtration systems that we have, and the energy consumptions that go into it. And last but not the least is now the eco situation, the discharge of the wastewater from the grease filtration system. Even that is causing a lot of problems by the government to put that drainage not even into the sewage system, not even into our own septic tanks or filtration system. So that discharge is even a problem at a later stage. So I think the investors also need to be given this kind of inputs more initially than later on at the time of procurement.
Yeah, I mean, I think interestingly that the price of energy is going up, and it will continue to rise more rapidly than it has over the past 10, 15 years. Cost of water will go up as water is becoming more scarce, and there are more hotels coming into the market, so the competition will be fiercer. And I think if we can put this picture over of the effect of running costs, and people understand that if they don't address it now, it's going to be a lot more expensive later on, and to compete in a market that will be out there by dropping room rates, they're not going to make a profit unless they've got an efficient hotel. But I think what I've found over the years is single people lobbying groups doesn't work. It has to be a group of, and it might be different aspects of construction who actually lobby clients and make them aware of what the impact of inefficient buildings is. Not in terms of sustainability, but in terms of actual cost. I'd like to bring Arnie in now, just to get Arnie's thoughts on what we've discussed up to date. Welcome, Arnie.
Thank
Perhaps
you,
you can tell us a little bit about what you do and your thoughts in this area.
Yes, I'm a technical sales manager for Triple S India and for Vianen kitchen ventilation in the Netherlands. I'm mainly responsible for the export projects we do from SSS to Southeastern Asia, for example Thailand and Indonesia. Our main experience is when we're doing a project that not all stakeholders in one project are aware of consequences of design decision they're making. For example, we had a project where the kitchen consultant changed some fryers for some woks. When this happens, the amount of exhaust volume of that exhaust hood goes up, but the duct design stayed the same. So what happened in the end, there was not enough exhaust because the decision was made in the beginning of the project. And this is one of the key issues we're experiencing.
Okay.
Well, that's exactly the point. You have the procurement is being done of a different product than what it was designed for. So the design doesn't change now, it's executed.
Yeah, exactly. And we have, and it works in both ways. On the one hand, we have to educate HVAC people on what's happening in a kitchen. We often see an HVAC design where the kitchen is just a black box.
Yeah.
While we're doing kitchen ventilation design, what do we have to do? Exhaust the cooking fumes. So that's the basis, that's the crucial part we have to deal with. And if you don't understand this matter, then it's quite hard to design the filtering system, to design the ductwork. On the other hand, kitchen consultants, they know how the basic design rules for an exhaust hood, but sometimes they're not always aware of their design decisions later in the process influence the ductwork and ventilation design.
And in terms of the ventilation systems you provide, is there anything innovative, new you want to tell us about, or is it conventional systems?
Well, we see the global trend in less usage of energy in a kitchen or in general, and 30% of the energy used by a kitchen is consumed by the ventilation system. So there is a big demand for more effective exhaust hoods. For testing, fortunately there is a standard to test the efficiency of exhaust hoods, and there are some techniques that you can use to make it more efficient. It's always important when you want a more efficient exhaust hood to ask for the testing specifications, how it is tested and who has tested it. So you know that if you buy it, you know it will work.
Okay. I'd like to bring Imran back in now, just on a subject related to this, but not specifically about kitchen ventilation,
Right.
but the use of building information modelling
Right.
for carrying out design.
Yes.
Because one of the tools available to the industry now is BIM. And for those of you that don't know what BIM is creating a 3D model of your building design that you can input intelligence into the various components, be it the architecture, the structure, the MEP design, including plumbing, drainage. You can do energy modelling from that design. You can do CFD analysis of the ventilation systems you put in. So it's a tool that is coming in slowly, and there are a lot of companies who are selling the fact they will do a BIM model, but they're actually doing a Revit model, which is an illustration, whereas a BIM model has intelligence that you can use to develop the design. And some of the problems that were raised earlier about drainage is a simple example. You see the drainage in 3D. The falls can be preset in the design input, so you get a fall on the pipe that you need to achieve the drainage, and if you have a clash, it will identify it. So perhaps, Imran, if you could tell us a bit about the use of BIM and how you use it to help.
So along with BIM, I think what Barry's talking about is parametric design. So basically the problem that he's saying, that you have one equipment, and by the time you change it, the model will itself have calculated whether the ventilation is adequate or the right kind. And this is possible within BIM as of now. It is not something that is futuristic or anything. I'll just step back a little bit and talk about our experience in the building industry, which, so when we have a standalone hotel which is being developed by the owners, or it has been less challenging in terms of the ventilation. But what we are finding the challenge right now is that the initial design team will probably belong to a developer who will be very conservative. They are not really thinking of the hotel needs, etc. And then an operator will come in, or a secondary buyer will come in, and then the whole thing will start to modify and change. And this is where a BIM model can be very useful to anybody who's kind of coming in, because you can almost see real-time changes and ascertain where the problems really lie within the system. Like he's saying, you can assign the pressure, you can assign any kind of intelligence into the system. It could be just the volume of people. We are even doing things like you can almost sort of plan how much the hotels walk. You can, I mean, if you want to go to that level of intelligence into this. But most of all, what it is doing is that it takes out, especially with respect to ventilation and drainage and plumbing, you can reduce a lot of redundancy in the space utilization. Right now, because it's all modeled in 2-dimension, people don't know that they can actually use much lesser space. And especially in basements and kitchens and areas which require a huge amount of ventilation. So we highly recommend people to sort of start looking at it, especially consultants, because there's a big gap in MEP and not so much in structure, but in MEP consultants who are actually doing this and using it intelligently. The parametric facilities that exist with BIM, I mean, from a pure architecture point of view, I can check for any building without having to check it, the fire travel distance. In hotel industry is very important. So while you're making some changes, something has shifted and you overlook that, and that comes to bite you later on. But in ventilation or in water supply or in plumbing, there's so much more that you can do with it apart from the value engineering that's possible using BIM. Maybe Barry can just add some more to that.
Yeah, one of the things it does for me is make it very easy to demonstrate to the whole team what you're proposing in 3D, in 3 dimensions. You can run through a BIM model and simple things like you can check ventilation, you can check where the hoods are. Are they over the right equipment? Are they the right size? Things we were talking earlier about getting the wrong traps on drainage.
Yeah.
You actually see the traps in 3 dimensions. You're not looking at a plan and trying to guess whether the legend uses the right symbol.
Yeah.
So you physically see everything, and you can get the design to a state where the whole team is working on the same model.
Correct.
So the coordination aspect doesn't come into it because there is only one model.
Yeah. We are sort of now experimenting with virtual reality to do that coordination. So you actually virtually construct the building and you walk inside it with the Oculus headsets, and it's like you are actually there in a physical building and you can look around just like you would be in a physical building. It just makes coordination so much easier.
Narendra, have you come across the use of BIM and 3D modelling in the work you've been doing?
We also use the 3D basically for the display kitchens, and that gives a better idea to the interior designer and helps us coordinate with them more closely. So I think 3D is the thing to use in the future as we go along. And I think it can help in many ways in detailing and coordination with the services also. So we are beginning to rely on that quite a lot.
Yeah.
Barry, for a lot of the projects, you even get the equipment already modeled by the manufacturer.
Yeah.
So there is no, if you pick a model, you can actually install it, an AHU. You can tie intelligence to it. When is the maintenance going to be? Who's the maintenance company? It can go over the life cycle of the project. And it's just, I think all the technology is there. People are afraid to use it. It's something that we find very amazing, that people should be running after it rather than running away from it.
Yeah. I went to an Autodesk seminar and presented a couple of weeks ago, and the theme was the future is here, but not enough people know about it. And the information is there, but there's not enough knowledge or skills to understand it and how to use it. Yeah. Arnie, from your perspective, do you produce BIM models or Revit models in your families to aid designers, consultants to do the design?
Well, I would first like to say in my university education I was trained using 3D modeling software. They told me, don't use AutoCAD because it's 2D, it's from the 80s, forget it. Then I came into the industry and everything is 2D. And it cost me some time to adapt and to understand the drawings. And one of the major benefits of a building information model is that it's 3D and it is very visual. So the plumber doesn't need to educate the kitchen consultant about drainage. You just see a 3D model and you see a red cross around it and it's protruding, and yeah, it doesn't work. You don't need to know about sloping. So the learning curve is way less. We are unfortunately still mainly designing in 2D, but we are gradually shifting to 3D packages, because we only do the exhaust hood, which we consider as a product. We use the SolidWorks package for this, but it works together with all types of building information model packages that are available on the market.
Okay. Varun, any experience from your side on 3D? So, Ashok. Apologies.
So far we have been using only 2D drawings.
Okay.
I know that the team has come and 3D drawings are also started, but in our smaller projects so far we have been using only 2D. And maybe in the future we will start using 3D.
I think there will be a time in the future when everybody's working on 3D. Like when we made the change from manual drafting to AutoCAD, the industry had a big step backwards because we had lots of engineers who could draw on computer but didn't understand what they were drawing. The industry is having a similar problem now. We have lots of people who can draw in 3D but can't actually design or engineer it.
And at present very few consultants are doing 3D drawings, not all of them.
Yeah.
So probably it will take some time.
Yeah. Well, as a practice, we intend to change over within 12 months. We will do everything in 3D because the technology and the tools are there. It's a case of training your people into how to use it, and it will benefit the industry so much, make life so much easier, that I think the quicker we can push for it as an industry, and as Imran said earlier, we can actually link in an FM model to a Revit model now, and we're doing that on a project where we will have the full maintenance facilities to maintain a hotel project on a BIM 3D model. So it's available now, it can be done now, but there will be a learning curve, I believe, to get there. So we've talked a little bit about ventilation, different rates and exhaust. What about comfort in the kitchen? Because I know from experience, a number of times we go in kitchens and they are heavy pressure areas in a peak time. They have a lot of people in there working hard, a lot of heat output. From your experience, Narendra, is kitchen comfort an issue that needs addressing, or has it been addressed and doesn't need much consideration?
You know, Barry, I think finally nobody is interested in the comfort of the chef or the cook. It's the hygiene standards and requirements that is insisted and has convinced everybody to air condition their kitchens at the cost that you just mentioned, which is prohibitive. So what the intention is actually, it doesn't always get executed that way because of the running costs, etc. But the reason is that the staff should not sweat at their place of work, and especially when you're working in the hot kitchens, that can lead to a lot of perspiration and a drop and contaminate the food, etc. So that's the main thing which has resulted in air conditioning the kitchen generally. The second area where, and that means air conditioning, you know, to the extent of not just comfort level, but to reduce that, which can be quite expensive at the hot range, and getting that, you know, the chilled air on him so it doesn't perspire. But the second areas where air conditioning or the temperature control becomes very important. And again, that is due to the HACCP and the hygiene reasons. And that is in the cold kitchens. Wherever we have, whether it's the garde manger, vegetable prep, meat prep, fish prep, confectionery, chocolate rooms, they require actually to maintain the temperature not for the comfort of the cook or his perspiration level, but to keep the cold food in the cold zone area so that the bacteria development doesn't take place. Because the maximum amount of time that food can be left in ambient is 4 hours. And therefore, they want the temperatures brought down to 18 degrees minimum, or rather maximum in this case, which is very difficult to do because air conditioning, as you know, very difficult to bring down and keep those temperatures. And we've tried to impress upon the operators, or the foreign operators especially, that it is a very difficult, very costly exercise to do that. And secondly, we have found that the people who work there need jackets and coats because the temperatures are too cold. And as long as they enforce it, that's well and good. But the moment you get time, they start switching off and increasing the temperatures. So having spent all that money, keeping the let's say the work going in those temperatures is also should be continued so that the money invested comes into full use. But actually, it is important and it should be exercised that the temperatures do not go beyond 18 to 19 degrees in these cold kitchen areas for HACCP reasons.
Yeah.
It is expensive, but for investment, equipment, and in terms of operations. But I think it is necessary.
Yeah. But they're normally small areas which are not going to have really significant high running costs, even though you're keeping them cool. But the big open kitchens, which are large areas, and if you do, particularly in this region, you've got high humidities, high temperatures, and if you don't cool them or dehumidify properly, you've got a health hazard with people sweating on the food as well as the comfort, and lack of efficiency in staff if they're too hot.
What is the alternative then, Barry? What do you suggest? How can we go about that? Because sweating is a problem in the hot range. And I've seen people actually, when they're working, perspire.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's more effective design of hoods themselves to get rid of the radiant heat or prevent the radiant heat, get rid of the convective heat, stop the cooking odours spilling over, so that if you reduce the exhaust rate, you then reduce the supply air rate, and then deliver the supply air where it's needed, where people are working, not throughout the whole area.
Definitely, you're right. The right type of ventilation system can reduce the cost of air conditioning by having a proper circulation system around the hot kitchen. That is very correct.
Yeah.
And that's where you need to select the right kind of equipment in the initial stages so that and take it through to the procurement stage.
Are there any innovations in cooking equipment coming out that reduce the amount of heat required?
Yes, fortunately, it is beginning to happen. We have a lot of, induction so far was considered only for heating and used in the buffets. But technology has come up to the extent where large volume can be, high heat can be produced by the induction and to cook large volumes of food. And secondly, that is the one piece of equipment, as you know, and we all know, that produce heat only where the pot is in contact with a plate. So it's not giving off heat elsewhere. That is again expensive, but again, we have to change the mindset of the chefs, because as it is, our Indian chefs love to see flames coming out, and here you have a plate which doesn't even give you heat to touch. So it's very difficult to cook when you can't see heat or feel heat. But that is what is happening abroad, and it's going to come here very soon. So like we have in buffets, we have cut down the exhaust and ventilation quite a bit because of that, rather than to have the fuel burning in all the chafing dishes. We'll see more of that happening in the kitchens also.
Okay.
So I think that will bring your air conditioning down quite a bit. Yeah.
And the ventilation rate as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Ashok, any comments on the type of cooking equipment and comfort in kitchens?
Yes, comfort in the kitchen. Earlier, we were only using the ambient air for the kitchen ventilation and cooling. Of late, all the kitchens what we are designing is with the air conditioning, spot cooling, and comfort conditions are provided, and hygiene standards are maintained in all the kitchens. But yes, still it needs more concentration on the appropriate ventilation rates, because I find at most of the times it gets over-designed because whatever the reasons, it should be optimized as the energy cost has gone up very high.
Yep.
And it puts the pressure on the operations. So that one thing is important, that it should be appropriately designed for.
Yep. Imran, as an architect, what's your interest in the comfort conditions in the kitchen, the use of new technology, or do you see that as being a black box for the specialist to design and advise you on?
So, Barry, there are two different experiences. One is what you're saying, it's a black box and it's been designed. But what we are finding interestingly in the restaurant business is where a lot of the restaurant now being driven by the chef, the branding of the chef, and they are very particular about what they want. And they are starting to demand, and they actually treat it like a workspace pretty similar to ours, as opposed to being just a kitchen. And that is throwing up interesting challenges to make it more demonstrative, open, yet at the same time perform all the technical functions that is required. The other thing which probably you can shed some light is that what kind of pressures does the building being green put on the ventilation, especially the kitchen, because obviously it jumps much higher and the fresh air requirement, etc., goes up substantially.
And the answer is that if it's designed properly, it puts a huge pressure on the design, because the consumption, the energy consumption in both kitchen and laundry is the highest behind the chillers. And I said earlier, a kitchen typically it's 30% of the chiller load. So it's the first area you can reduce in terms of energy efficiency. If you reduce your chiller load, you reduce your power consumption. You can reduce the space of distribution. So it has a whole series of add-ons that you can do. And what I find often happens is when somebody comes up with the idea of induction cooking, as an example, Narendra, it reduces the cooling load a small amount in consideration of the whole project. But when you add everything on that it saves, it's substantial, because you can, from reducing chillers, reducing cooling towers, reducing substations, it becomes significant. If you look at individual things on their own, they may not be substantial, but look at the whole picture. And that's one of the difficulties in convincing a lot of owners, is to look at the whole picture, not just that one little area.
No, you're absolutely right, Barry. That also, you'll remember that not so long ago, we used to calculate the exhaust based on square footage of the hood or the hot areas. And so that used to amount to, if you consider it with new technologies being used, 3 to 4 times more than what is required today. The way we calculate the requirement of exhaust is nothing to do with the area of the hood any longer, but what is the cooking equipment being used. So every equipment gives off certain amount of heat. So it doesn't mean that a tandoor versus a griddle is going to give off the same heat. So it cannot be generalized as a square foot basis. But on the other hand, one has to be careful in the future that this layout shouldn't change so drastically that it upsets the exhaust and ventilation after 5 or 7 years, because then you can't do anything to the ducting. But that doesn't mean that initially we cannot or we should not calculate based on the energy load of the equipment that we're exhausting, and take some yardsticks into consideration and leave some amount for flexibility in the future. And I think that is one of the main reasons which has brought down the ventilation requirements. And that's because these hoods technology that is being used today, unfortunately, not very few fabricators are there who have brought in the technology from outside and helped to reduce this volume of exhaust, and thereby reducing the air conditioning load also, because a lot of air conditioning just gets pulled out from the exhaust.
Yeah.
So
and the problem with that is when you pull it out and it's grease laden, you can't reclaim the energy.
yes,
Whereas if you have something like a UV filter, which has to be maintained, you can then reclaim some of that energy. But there's a maintenance cost of making sure it is maintained well, otherwise the heat recovery unit you put in will soon get blocked.
that's right.
And then the design team will get blamed.
You know, talking about the exhaust calculations, I remember at one time when we started abroad even, they used to calculate by the air changes, if you remember.
Yeah.
Now, there was no yardstick. I mean, there was no air conditioning in those days. But your kitchen had to have 30 air changes or 40 air changes.
Yeah.
But that was a huge amount of exhaust and ventilation that you had to have. And you could feel the movement of air, and even the flames used to sway. So from those days till now, we have come a long way in reducing the exhaust in our kitchens. And I think we are going the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Arnie, if I can bring you in now in terms of comfort in kitchens and new technologies.
Yes.
Anything you'd like to add?
Well, about comfort in the kitchen, what we often see in the five-star hotel market, they spend a lot of time, money to get experienced, well-known chefs to restaurants. And these chefs, they need to perform optimally because they have only one moment they can show what they're capable of. That's the moment the dish is presented to the guest. And that's the top of the game. So a pro footballer, he can play another game, but when the chef is slightly under performing, then he lost it. So that's why it's important to create the best environment ever possible for him to do his work, to do his job, to make that food as good as possible. So that's why we think a comfortable kitchen is very important.
Okay. Last subject before we open it up for general discussion is fire safety, because kitchens are typically the area in a hotel where a fire is most likely to start, because you have open flames, you do have oil and grease, and you do have people working at a frantic pace and running around. What in terms of new technologies or safety provisions, Narendra, do you think is often overlooked or may not be given as much consideration as it might? Is there anything that stands out?
Well, the fact that we've started using this fire safety systems and, you know, fortunately we haven't come across any situation where, I mean, once or twice it does happen that these, what do you call this, your?
Fire suppression system.
Yeah, fire suppression system, the gas or the sprinkler, triggers off, and sometimes by mistake and sometimes actually. So that is the best way actually and the most efficient way you can use to create fire safety in a kitchen. But on the other hand, again, what is the problem is the amount of investment that goes in to having that system and to change the gas every year because the time lapses. So again, it makes the client think twice. I'm talking about clients not in larger hotels, but in smaller hotels, and not the ones operated by foreign operators, because they just insist they got to have it, and they have it. Insurance now requires these systems to be put in place. So I think that is the best way of solving the problem of a fire in a kitchen. We used to end gas disconnect immediately, and secondly is the exhaust switching off or disconnect whenever there is a fire alarm. I think these are the things which can help us in securing the fire.
There are new systems such as water misting systems, which are manufactured on a small scale for kitchen hoods, which are a lot more economical, which may make it more attractive for people to provide them.
Maria, there are a couple of systems which are on water base, and in fact Marriott and few other companies, even I think NFPA allows you to use water from the sprinkler system if you use the Grinnell mist spray.
Yeah.
But that's fine, but I think in terms of in terms of technology, the system which is, you can say, foolproof and will shut off the fire is the the halon system or the other
the wet
gas-based systems they have, because water still doesn't take care of taking the oxygen away from the fire.
The misting system does.
Misting,
there's a high pressure.
I know.
So it's a low-cost replacement if it does ever go off. Yeah.
So I think we can still use that in smaller hotels or in restaurants, but in larger hotels with great deal of investments should go in for a proper fire extinguishing system, a fire safety system.
Okay. Ashok, any comments on fire life safety?
See, in ITC properties, apart from the fire suppression system which has been provided, there is a preventive maintenance scheduling for the cleaning of duct from inside, which is being contracted out to the outside agencies. So every quarter they do the physical cleaning of the duct from inside to prevent the fires.
Okay. Imran, any comments?
I think what Ashok has mentioned is what we find in most buildings, that there's maintenance of the equipment, and it's an attitude towards fire, I think, that's lacking. And like in most hazards that have taken place in India, the passages are blocked with equipment, not enough care has been taken, there's not enough light ventilation. Even though they are planned properly, but they're not maintained to look after. So that's something that, it's a general comment, it's not necessarily.
Yeah. Hani?
Well, if it comes to active fire suppression in the kitchen, on the cooking line, we think a system according to the UL 300 standard, like ANSO, KIDI, Amorex, they all do a very good job in preventing spreading the kitchen fire and extinguishing it. If you see a type of equipment that generates fire sparks, like we see more and more in open kitchen, guests want to see fire, chef wants to see open fire, they want to see coal inside a building. When I do barbecuing, I do it outside, but you see it more and more inside. When you have this situation, we advise to put in a canopy with an active water mist system. So there is a cold water mist sprayed in the canopy that extinguishes the fire sparks and reduces the risk of fire in the ductwork. Another way to prevent grease deposits in a ductwork is by using a UV filter system. UV burns down the grease particles, so there's no grease that can be deposited in the ductwork itself. But you have to keep in mind that UV system works up till 50, maybe 60 degrees. So when you have really hot equipment with hot exhaust, like fire equipment, then UV is not effective anymore, so you only use the mist system.
Okay. I'd like to thank all the panel for their comments and open up for general discussion now. If anybody has any questions, topics they'd like to discuss a little bit further, please fire away. No comments, no questions?
Barry, you've covered everything.
I just want to share one bit of information. We do get reports of at least one fire in a kitchen every month, and sometimes we get 2 fires in a month. So that is these are the hotels where fire suppression system is installed, and we don't know about the rest, but there are a lot of fire incidents. So and it happened. This has happened in many Delhi hotels as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think we can ask some questions from the restaurant operators, because if on ventilation, unless everybody is very hungry. But
yeah, hello. My name is Binay Sagu. I'm with PIP 2020, and one of our expertise is to convert hotels from one operator to another, or from a non-operator to operator. What we have experienced is that, like, you guys are all professionals and do perfect drawings, but when you actually do go on site and we go and check, those things are not installed properly. It means drawings are perfect, everything is specified, owner has bought everything to your specifications, but when we go and check, either those things are missing, or they are not connected, or they are not ventilated. So that is where, like, you experience all these smells. You might design all the best systems and take care of all the ventilation, but if there's the duct doesn't go anywhere, and the owner is not going to go check it whether the guy has actually connected the 2 pieces, that's, I think, major problems are happening. Just to add on to your...
Yeah, no, I've experienced that myself. The only thing you can do really is make sure the building is commissioned properly, and whoever is responsible for the design is given the opportunity to go on site and check and report. Because unless somebody goes and physically checks that it's been installed, checks the operation, rechecks the commissioning figures as the contractor does it, you've got no guarantee it will work properly.
So that's why I guess that's what I'm trying to emphasize is, I think it's your consultant's duty to educate the owners that all their money is going to go waste if we can design the best, but if it is not done correctly on site, everything is waste. I mean,
that's a very good point. Actually, we agree with what you're saying. It does happen that way. Unfortunately, the consultants are they don't have the mandate to supervise the site all the time, whether it's the architect or M&E consultants or ourselves or interiors. But it's the job of the project manager. And we can only go to the site, and we do go periodically. And whatever is the observations, we bring it to the notice of the project manager. Now, there's certain onus that he has to, or the party, or the project management or team has to maintain, not again come back to the consultant that it's your responsibility to have made sure that it had happened. Because execution is definitely the job of the project manager. And he's the one who's certifying the bills and making the last payments. So he has to make sure that the equipment is in a working condition.
If there is any project manager on board for the
Certainly.
architect, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Certainly, we'll do that.
Verma, maybe it is important for all consultants and all of us to at least set some milestones where we should be involved, to educate even the project managers. It might be an owner's project manager, which is not outsourced, but his own project manager on board. But I think those milestones, he might still not call you. But I think some sort of a legend when we given the design, at what stage you need to intervene, if those stages can be identified, I think we could go one step forward, at least in educating.
I agree with you.
You
I
might
think
still
that is a
not
good way
follow.
of doing it. One should stipulate.
Yes, I think it should be part
I
of the
think so.
contract.
It should be part
It
of the
should be part
contract.
of the contract.
It's a good idea. I think I'll take it up. But on the other hand, I found, or I find that the more knowledgeable the project manager is or project team is at site, the more they will get the consultant to come and see and verify and get their inputs. And those project managers who have the least amount of knowledge and know-how tend to do everything themselves because they don't want to be told that what they're doing is not right, because they will be answerable to the owner. So I've found, and by the time you see it, it's all done. You can't blame anybody because it's all been done. You can try to rectify as much as you can, but unfortunately that is the case. It's the project manager.
I have a question here. That is there any data which has been, kind of developed or researched in the past where understand what is the kind of, we have air quality check that we do as a part of ISO. So are there any studies where we probably have understood what kind of issues we have, and why we have arrived at a particular, especially in the Indian context, the Indian setup? What are the challenges in the system, whether it's restaurant as well as the other kitchens?
I'm not aware of any studies that have been done, but there are, for example, demand control systems for kitchen ventilation that measure temperature, steam, and chemicals within the air and will control the ventilation accordingly. We also install typically a lot of carbon dioxide sensors in public areas, so we can monitor the amount of fresh air to control the right amount of fresh air according to the occupancy of those areas. But in terms of monitoring the results and the other contaminants, because whilst you can control the carbon dioxide quantity, you can't control the PM2 small dust particles, which may come in because there's a construction site next door,
Right.
or because you have a lobby door that opens in the prevalent wind direction. So no detailed studies being done, but there are ways of controlling ventilation systems to try and help control it to the right quantity to suit the circumstances. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, purely from the point that do the the experts come back from the hotels and say that yes, these are the changes that possibly we are seeing in the ventilation system, and we would need you to help us on these lines. Do we have any kind of such history where, because air quality check is one of the mandatory norms. So are we really doing it, or is it on papers? And that's how I'm looking at it.
Okay, we have done it on projects overseas, but not in India, because no owner is prepared to pay for us to come back and do it. But part of what you could do if you develop a BIM model, it can be linked to your BMS system that will measure the various components in the air you want to measure, and you can get an instant feedback. So you would not have to continuously go to site.